I live in the website. It's actually pretty cool. Pretty freaking happy with that. Figured out how to live in Griff's website. And he doesn't know it, but I am a ghost there, always looking. All right, today, lunchtime, wanted to go over what Griff posted about the living rules of original edition. We'll do a quick read and just kind of go over what's my thoughts are, what your thoughts are. The living rules of OD&D. Am I far off base with this statement? People who play OD&D are a very niche group who like to tinker with their game rules. It is a very old school mindset which does not appear in most modern RPG games because the original rules for D&D are completely flexible and open to interpretation by each referee. One can say the same for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. While it was meant as a much more strictly ruled and complete system, most gamers would streamline portions of it to make it play faster, more smoothly, or simply as a matter of personal taste. There are constant debates over rules. Okay, let's call them arguments. Which edition is better? If you play OD&D, the rules are badly written. You guys, if you've ever read those books, it's like what my brain is like. So I've got massive ADHD, and when I try to read something, I could probably explain it by, hey, if you want to know what it's like to have ADHD and like really sit down to read something, pick up the Men and Magic book or whatever and read that and try to make sense of it the first time you read it. And that's what reading with ADHD is like, I think. So they contradict themselves, and there are huge gaps for how to adjudicate portions of it. Coming up with solutions during gameplay is the only way to truly make it work. Every game master learns to do it as part of normal gameplay. Yep, as written, the rules are full of clunk. I admit it, the original game's a total mess, but the original design also has a lot of good ideas in it. It's got phenomenal ideas in it. And I do think that as a player, I prefer something with a much more structured rule set, but I also prefer playing war games. But as a ref, like with my kids and friends and everything, I absolutely prefer to run something way more open-ended, like just a basic 1974 OD&D 3-book game is pretty amazing. You can do a ton of shit with it. I'm doing a bunch of stuff with just D6, not like Bandit's Keep is doing. Daniel over there is doing really cool stuff. I'm doing this thing where I'm trying to get rid of the D20 altogether because I just like rolling D6. And so rolling 2d6 plus modifiers, weapon, class, and AC is how we've been playing lately, which I really enjoy. And so I guess I am someone that likes to tinker with the rules. So I think Griff's onto something there. Let's see. Yeah. With each edition and iteration, which begins with Greyhawk Supplement and continues through Holmes AD&D, then into every other actual edition, the rules are changing. Some things are added for better gameplay, but many others are attempts to fix problems and fill gaps, which are such a mass of details that I can't list them all here. Something to consider, every RPG since D&D is just a variant on the one game which attempts to plug holes in the rules. I want to think about that. Something to consider, every RPG since D&D is just a variant on the one game which attempts to plug holes in the rules. So I'm thinking of Outbreak Undead right now. The game is such a different take on everything, but if I try to point out something that is new, even though it's bucketed up together, I don't think I can actually grab onto something that they did other than character creation. And that's just a matter of preference of simulation. In that game, you can take a litmus test or a test to determine your personality, and that becomes your character for a simulation. So I think I can agree, without thinking about it more, I can agree that it's a variant on the first game. The desire to fix problems with such things as a universal one-size-fits-all mechanic is the greatest flaw in these games and begins fairly early on. The assumption that everything can be reduced to simple die rolls quite literally destroys the RPG as an immersive player experience. It changes an RPG into a computer game on paper. I see the point. Rob Kuntz told me this: you can't rule reality. I am now convinced that there is such a great difference between Zero Edition and Fifth Edition that the two games are not even the same thing. I absolutely agree. I honestly think that Fifth Edition takes, if you put it into like BX mindset, it takes the first three levels, adds in heroic fantasy and combat ability, and focuses on that and throws out what the beauty of the original game and like AD&D was. I always urge people to at least try the old game. Original D&D Three Little Brown Books with the supplements, perhaps a bit of Holmes Basic D&D added in, and a monster manual. Even a variant like our own Tonsberg Zero Edition rules by Dan Boggs can fall within this range of complete yet perhaps incomplete games. The Tonsberg, I'm probably saying that wrong, book is well worth a purchase and a read. The encounter system, it's just a cool, it's a cool way to play. And honestly, when I play with my kids, that is similar to how we're running a game. There's no way in hell I'm going to get an 8-year-old and a 40-year-old to sit at the same table and enjoy the same game if I'm throwing nothing but rules over them. I got to be honest, and for myself, if I would I'd rather play a character creation light game that is rules structured like first edition. The reason I've avoided it for so long is that I hate the character creation in first edition and anything newer than that. I really like the fact that I can pick up an index card and 3 dice or whatever and roll up a complete character and be ready to play in 10 minutes, 5 minutes. And I do it with my friends and kids constantly. And I think it's important. I think that trying to get an 8-year-old to play a first edition game with a freaking 40-year-old is never going to work. But I can absolutely sit an 8-year-old down with a 11-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 40-year-old and play a little brown book game or a basic game. There's no question. But I think that when you get into basic, you start getting into more of a board game nature anyways. So no OD&D campaign in its rules are like any other because they can't be. What most do not understand... What's up, dude? What most do not understand is the true nature of the old rules. Perhaps the closest analog to the old rules is a business plan. A business plan is a living document. You create your plan in order to outline your purpose and goals. Here's a rub. Very often a business will be moving along and they will realize they may be doing something much different from what was projected in the business plan. That's a great way to put it. I do a lot of business plans for myself. I've launched a lot of different businesses, and the game that I'm playing with the group that I ref for is absolutely evolving like a lot of businesses evolve. Oh, time to go back and change the business plan, assess where things are really going so the business can be more successful. The last thing you want to do in a business is remain too rigid and not address how both what is doing and what the real world is doing have changed. It's the same for every OD&D game master. Oops, I need a rule, or oops, I need to change a rule. It's going back to like, okay, the rules like freeform style that comes out of OD&D versus what I look at like 1E as I'm looking at the rule set more and more because of Mr. John. It's a war game for sure. There's no question. It's a structured war game, and it offers predictable results. And that is actually what I want as a player. The problem is, like I said, I cannot ref that game with a huge age range starting in, single digits. It's just not going to work. And so I can't run those games, but I absolutely would love to play in a game that is like that, because I would prefer to pick up Necromunda and have a little bit more campaign meat on Necromunda and play that war game than play something else. Just because I enjoy war games are the shit. They just are. The play style is open to such an extent that a referee may not be sure if they are making a new rule or simply making a ruling on the spot. There's a difference here as well. A rule is not the same thing as a ruling. I have blogged about rule variants, which I now think are too complex and need to be handled by rulings. See how these rules keep changing real time? This is why I refer to OD&D as being the only truly living published game rules for an RPG. Most other rules, which come later, are just not D&D. Are meant to be played, not just D&D, are meant to be played as the publisher intends you to play. OD&D is like buying a set of Legos. You can build what you want. Today's rules do not mention the possibility for individual gamers to change them, as D&D does when stating these rules are guidelines. It is still there in AD&D, but it is hidden in the appendix. People who play within the milieu of old school game rules are doing something very different from almost all other gamers. They may not be published authors, but for the most part, they are all game designers. And this is a freaking amazing statement, because I have run into so many game designers that run OD&D, and I myself worked in the space, and there is something to be said to a framework that's not just about skinning something for a new time period. AD&D, absolutely. If you want to leave it as is, you can go and skin it for many different things. But if you take a look at something like Raiders of the Lost Artifact, which is built on the original edition, there's their own features come in, their own mechanics come in, and it turns into something completely unique, even though it has the same soul. If you look at any other game from the era of D&D and before, you see the same thing, a core system which remains pretty much untouched, which then has home rules attached to it, along with the fly rulings to resolve specific events. So as a player, and actually as a referee as well, I think that when we have a rule system that is untouched, it allows us to actually have consistent results for the world. So I kind of on the fence with whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, and it's probably good and bad in different situations. Yeah. All right, dude. The mindset of having loose rules comes out of wargaming. There are very specific kinds of war games with very precise rules, and then there are all the miniature rules, which require a bit of interpretation. Chainmail is a perfect example. You have several systems within one book, and you also have a lot of conditional rules you can decide to use or not use based on the type of battle you are trying to simulate. With a war game scenario, design can introduce problems. An entire war game session can quickly reveal itself to be unbalanced, and a game needs to be scrapped halfway through. With D&D, your players may not notice any changes at all, but you will become aware that it just doesn't feel like your game is playing correctly, and you can adjust course halfway through a game session by changing the rules. I expect a bit of blowback on this idea of changing the rules mid-game. I think that the blowback you might have from that, dude, is by people being very black and white on it. I don't think what Griff means here is that you're changing core functionality, like there's hit dice, there's damage, and this type of weapon does this type of damage. I would assume he's talking about things that are more along the lines of what's governing freeform play, investigation, various things. But I'd be interested in you expanding that, dude, and actually addressing exactly what you're talking about. I'm not going to speculate. I think of my own game group and what they are forced to go through within my ever-evolving rules system. First, it was a home-brewed and streamlined variant of 3rd edition, mashup of Petal Throne, Metamorphosis Alpha, and OD&D. Dude, Metamorphosis Alpha is this shit. And I love the initial quest rolls in Empire, written on a few sheets of paper. Then it morphed into sort of by the books homes, and then it became more like OD&D, and now it is mutating once again. It is an endless search for the sweet spot on just enough rules to make it work, yet not so many as to become too rigid for it to work. There are many rules which were tried even before D&D was published. Hit location, defensive saving throws, spell points, skills, you name it, and they had thought of it way back then. Arnecon speaks of these things in many of his interviews. Some gamers claim Gygax created the perfect system with AD&D and that one should only play AD&D rules as written. Well, it turns out Gary didn't even play his own system that way. A lot of what he said about AD&D was simply marketing speech to help sell a product. Some will regard the obsession with competitive tournament play that was always being mentioned in Dragon magazine. That was there to help sell modules that had no relevance to most gamers running their home games for friends. It's interesting because there's a very big divide that happened at one point between wargaming and story gaming, or however you want to call it, adventure gaming, whatever you want to call it, because the tournament scene is still alive and well and a huge thing for wargamers. And it's interesting that competitiveness dropped out, is what it seems like, from the whole adventure game thing. Because I think, to me, competitiveness is one of the things that makes it fun. Winning and losing makes it fun. And I'm not saying that Griff doesn't feel this way, but to me, winning and losing is one of the things that make it work. If you can lose, there's a reason to do things. If you can't lose, that's why I don't like 5th edition. Because of what I see from 5th edition is no one loses. Everyone wins and they're all the feature. And I don't like it. I don't think it's a great way to play. Arnecon always said his rules were constantly changing. Both Dave and Gary even published their own RPGs after D&D. Over time, both went through the various stages of creating more complexity within their rules in order to fix the problems they saw. Yet with every change, there were another unexpected problem being created. It's like optimizing a website to rank and to take advantage of algorithms in Google. You're going to make a tweak. You're going to see how it reacts and how everything reacts to that tweak, and then you're going to adjust that tweak again. And you're going to keep doing that, and it is an ongoing basis. It will always be tweaked. And I can say that with the home game, it's constantly being tweaked. Yet with every change, there were other unexpected problems being created. It was a huge game of whack-a-mole. Smash one bad rule and another problem arises. Later in their lives, both creators of D&D appear to have gone back to using their original rules when they would run public games. Each likely had some of their own unwritten rules which they kept in their head, but they were essentially running the same game. For my own game, ever since I first played, I kept adding in and trying and often quickly removing little rules. My players are used to me saying, yeah, I tried that and we're going back to this other rule. And that's kind of cool, because right now what I'm doing is I'm trying to decide what mining system I want to use in the home game, because I'm doing some stuff for the players where they are prospecting, they are selling maps, there's claims involved. And the AD&D rules, especially when you get into the Dungeoneering survival guide, we use proficiency checks, this and that. And with OD&D, the Judges Guild prosperous prospecting rules, it's a time resource thing and a roll. And so the time resource thing, I think that's in AD&D as well. And they're very similar. I feel like the looseness of the Judges Guild system will work better for what I'm trying to do. And I'll probably dig a bit more into both of those systems later today to figure it out, because I need to get it ready for Thursday. I know for myself, let's see, what I've discovered is how complexity never solves game rule problems. It is within the referee ruling, very simple rules that the game plays well. I know for myself, this ever-changing system is part of what keeps me interested in playing D&D. The one problem I find is how to name this style of play, as old school sounds somewhat concretized and stuck in its own ego. It's adventure gaming, man. I'm telling you, it's just having something that is a skeleton that allows you to get people in a situation where they get to have fun. I would say the same for OSR. OSR, I'm not an OSR gamer by any means, since I've been playing since before the OSR. OSR is a marketing term that game designers and publishers use to sell products, and that's all the OSR is. Same with the BroSR. It's all marketing. Everything's marketing. And there's no two ways about it. You label something, you're marketing. In the Lost Dungeons of Tannisborg, we call it traditional role-playing. Maybe that sounds a bit stuffy. Putting titles onto something often freezes that thing in the state it was at when the name was created. This living world or living rules doesn't quite fit either. Maybe the best thing to say is we're playing D&D, and it's up to everyone else to learn that D&D as it was played with the old rules is a constantly evolving play style that moves with the times and never gets stale. The Lost Dungeons of Tannisborg is freaking amazing. I would absolutely recommend going and picking it up. My son and I have had a blast throwing him with a few different characters in there and watching him get destroyed, actually. Those freaking centipedes are evil. That's all I got to say. All right. I think it's a great article. Thanks, Griff. I do think that running a game like this is a lot more fun than running a game that has too many rules on it, at least for the age groups that I run it for. So, all right. Thanks. Bye.